Hi Year 10, it's Friday, and if you're watching this video you're in the second half of the lesson. Lesson's looking at Act 2, Scene 3 of Macbeth. So, as I've said in the notes I've given you, actually there's only really three things you need to know about this scene. Macduff bangs on the door, and then when he's inside the castle, he's the one that finds the body of King Duncan, so the murder becomes public knowledge. Secondly, there's shock and chaos, and Macbeth and his wife join in with that, or pretend to join in with that, and Macbeth reveals that he has killed the guards. And thirdly, Malcolm and Donald Bain, Duncan's sons, decide that they aren't safe now that their father has been murdered, and they're going to flee as well. And that's really important for a few different reasons, but particularly because it clears the way for Macbeth to become king. Malcolm is the heir apparent, but if he disappears off to England, then there is a vacancy, and Macbeth is going to be the next in line. So if you know that, you know this scene, and you don't need to worry really about the fact that the language in this scene is quite difficult. I think more difficult than average for this play. But at the same time, if we're revising different themes and characters in this play, I think there's a few particular quotes that it might be worth just picking up on, making a note on, and thinking about how can you use them in terms of talking about the character of Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, other characters, and also key themes in the play like the supernatural, guilt, truth and dishonesty. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm just going to pick out a few key quotes, say a bit about them, and you can add some details to your notes based on that. Okay, so looking at the first quote, well actually you've got a choice of a few different quotes, but the first detail I think, which is not crucial in the plot, but important in understanding the play, is this discussion between Macbeth and Lennox. So Macduff's gone off to wake up Duncan, as he thinks, and of course, in actual fact, he's going to find that Duncan is dead. So you've got that tension waiting for that to happen. But there's this kind of discussion, which actually we hear a few different times in the play. We've also already heard it right at the start of the play, in Act 1, about the weather. So it talks about the night has been unruly, a rough night, strong winds, lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death. Now that could just be the wind, but Lennox is interpreting this as some sort of supernatural event. And we get this idea of prophetic fallacy, yes, the weather reflecting events, but also this idea almost, which is I think a phenomena that lots of the audience would have happily believed in, God or the supernatural realm commenting on what's happening. So these screams are a protest almost against what's happened to Duncan. And that gives us a moral comment, therefore, or gives the audience a moral comment on what's happened to Macbeth. As well as the extreme weather, we've got an earthquake apparently. The earth was feverish and did shake. So Lennox talks about this quite poetically, and Macbeth just says it was a rough night. So Shakespeare does this quite a lot because he knows that the audience only get to hear this once. The theatre at the time would have been noisy and not silent like the theatre now. So Lennox talks in quite a bit of detail about the weather. And in case we've missed it, or in case we didn't get that, Macbeth just sums it up. It was a rough night. And you could just use that simple quote, a rough night, as one to remember to talk about when something bad happens in this play. The weather reflects that, and we can read that as a divine comment. Macbeth has done wrong. God is upset by this. Okay, so that's the first thing to pick out, any of those three, but maybe I'd probably go for the simplest one, the last one. The second quote is also to do with morality and religion in the play. So Macduff now is telling them what he's found, and it's just this two-word quote, which I think is quite a useful one to remember. Sacrilegious murder. So it's not just murder, but it's sacrilegious. In other words, it goes against religion, it goes against God. And we know that fits in with the idea of the divine right of kings, the king as God's representative. So if you get a question about Macbeth, any question about Macbeth, and your extract is from any part of the play, this is a useful quote that you can just drop in and talk about, well, how do we respond to Macbeth? Do we see him as a hero? Well, it's hard to do that if he's guilty of, quote, sacrilegious murder. And just a nice two-word quote that backs up your discussion of that character. Okay, on to the third one. So there's this long sort of reaction to what's happening here. Macduff talking in a lot of detail, shouting and raving, almost losing control really in his response to this murder. And then Lady Macbeth comes along and she says, what's the business? What's going on? And suddenly Macduff regains control and he's got a lot less to say than he had before. Oh, gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. And you could shorten that if you want to just remember a short quote, not for you to hear, or gentle lady. Either of those you could use to make the point if you were talking about Lady Macbeth's character, or if you were just talking about the idea of gender in the play. It tells us something about the expectations of women at this time. Lady Macbeth can't even hear what's happened. She might be the lady of the house, it might have happened in her house, but actually he's shouting it to all and sundry around the court, but when she's along, not for you to worry about, don't worry about it, it's not for you to hear. So he's protecting her, but he's also dismissing her and patronising her a little bit. And that's quite a little, just like I say, in those couple of lines, or you can shorten it to even a couple of words, a nice exemplification of the expectations of women at that time in that society. And then of course you can contrast that with Lady Macbeth and the witches through the rest of the play. And also perhaps you can link that to Lady Macbeth's speech in Act 1 Scene 5, unsex me here. She's very aware of that female role, but she wants to depart from that. And looking at Macduff's attitude here, remember Macduff is a hero in the play, a moral voice, the one that in the end does justice against Macbeth. So we can assume that the audience are not meant to be critical of Macduff here. So it's a sort of nice sort of contrast. How do we react then when Lady Macbeth goes against this role that's kind of expected of her in society? So that's the third one, if I remember rightly, and we're on to the fourth. I did talk about this when we looked at this part of the play in class last year, so you might remember it. Macbeth, had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time, for from this instant there's nothing serious in mortality. In other words, there's nothing serious in life. Life is meaningless. Now, I find that an interesting and a useful quote because you can say quite a lot about it in two different directions. Either this is Macbeth's really over the top effort at showing how upset he is by the death of Duncan. Life is worthless now without Duncan. Or we read Macbeth as being more genuine here. And actually, he's made such a mistake here. He's disrespected his own life and his own soul so much in what he's done that the rest of his life means nothing now. So he's risked or given everything to be king, and what's it done for him? Nothing, because life is now worthless because he's defiled it through this deed. And both of those, it seems to me, are equally valid. I wouldn't prefer one of those interpretations over the other, which obviously is a good thing in terms of wanting to talk about different layers of meaning in the exam. So a really nice quote, I think, in my opinion. And the next one is similar in terms of, here's Macbeth, and what do we think about what Macbeth says? How do we respond to Macbeth? A audience response and your response as an analyst of the play is obviously central to what you're going to write about this play in the exam. Well, here's a line that I find interesting, quite clever actually by Shakespeare, because at the end of the last scene, Macbeth hears the knocking and he says, "Wake Duncan with thy knocking, I would thou couldst." Wake Duncan with thy knocking, I wish you could. I wish Duncan was still alive. And that to me seems sincere. Almost immediately he regrets what he's done, he realises his mistake, and he's almost praying that Duncan could wake up. He wants the impossible, he wants to turn back the clock. So here is another expression of regret, but this one, to me, is much more ambiguous. Is he sincere? Or is he, as he is a lot in this scene, no doubt, playing to the gallery? He's definitely not told them the truth about what happened. He's not said he repents killing Duncan. He says, "I repent that I killed the guards." So, as an audience member here, or as a reader of the play here, I have to ask myself a question, which is this. I know Macbeth regrets killing Duncan. He said so. But I also know he's not telling the truth about that. And so, do I believe Macbeth here? Is he expressing repentance and sorrow? Or is he trying to cover up what he's done? In which case, he's piling an extra sin on top of what he's done by lying about being sorry for it. I think it's almost impossible to know. Maybe Macbeth himself doesn't really know what he means here. And that makes the character more complex, more interesting, but it also puts us on our guard because we start to think, up to this point we've had privileged access to Macbeth. Other people don't know about the things he's seen and thought and done, but we do. We see his soliloquies, we are privileged to hear his inmost thoughts, which apart from his wife, and sometimes even including his wife, no one else has that privilege. But now suddenly the shutters go up. I don't know whether to believe Macbeth or not, and that's why I find that an interesting quote. Okay, a few more to look at. So Macbeth justifies what he's done, killing the guards, even though people seem confused. Why have you done this? And then, if Macbeth has been trying to cover up what he's done, if we can talk about, I think, honesty and dishonesty, truth and falsehood is a big theme of the play. If Macbeth has been playing with that, Lady Macbeth, as she often does in the play, actually steps up and trumps her husband. He's been telling lies. She takes it to the next level. She pretends to faint, and she's carried out. So it's a stage direction. It's not something she says. And you probably wouldn't need to quote it in speech marks. You could quote in speech marks, Lady Macbeth is carried out. But if you get a question on Lady Macbeth, or if you get a question on deception or falsehood, you could just reference the idea of Lady Macbeth pretending to faint after Duncan's body is discovered. The idea of here as an actress, skillfully perhaps covering what she's done. And I think it is skillful. It's probably not going to be seen as over the top because we've already talked about what Macduff's view is. She can't even bear to hear the news. He actually says hearing the news would possibly kill her. So they're probably not going to be surprised or suspicious when she faints. So Lady Macbeth's deceptiveness, a nice reference or possibly quote to use there. Okay, I'm moving now towards the end of the play, number 7, the 7th quote to pick out. And it's the same theme, I think, of deception and falsehood. I think there's a big motif in this play of not being able to believe things. Think about Duncan, his view of the old Thane of Cawdor. He says he was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust, and he betrayed him. And Duncan can't believe it. He says, well, there's no art to tell the mind's construction in the face. And then Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth, he goes to the castle and says, yeah, this castle has a pleasant seat, and he's impressed by the hospitality. He gives Lady Macbeth a diamond to say thank you for looking after me, and as an audience we see the irony. Well, here's Donald Bain, there's daggers in men's smiles. So it's that same theme. You can't trust people. Appearance and reality are not the same, but it's also that same theme in a different way. Because Malcolm and Donald Bain are the next generation, and unlike their dad, they're aware, they're not so easily taken in. Duncan certainly is naive. Donald Bain knows the truth. He's not going to trust the people around him smiling. He knows that there are daggers in men's smiles. And maybe contextually, it justifies the king at the time, King James, and his paranoia about potential assassination attempts. So that's 7 quotes from Act 3, Scene 2.